I'm going to do three things in this speech. Firstly, explain why there is an obligation on these corporations to pay extra. Secondly, explain how this will change corporate behaviour upon exiting a jurisdiction or anticipating exiting a jurisdiction. And thirdly, explain how this will change jurisdictional behaviour to try and prevent, basically sinkholes of structural unemployment. To the first, why is there an obligation on these corporations to pay extra? Because they took advantage of low-skilled labour. That's why they go into these jurisdictions. That's particularly, as we heard in response to a point of information, why these particular populations are so attractive to companies or to whole industries. There's a reason why Detroit became the car-making capital of the United States, because there was a population that was low-skilled and was therefore cheaper for that company to use. Why is that important in this debate? Because low-skilled workers are also highly vulnerable workers. They're not educated, they don't have other opportunities. So here's the key thing. These companies that we're talking about have been directly benefited by this vulnerability and the lack of skills of this labour, which is exactly what creates the structural unemployment when they leave them behind. They've directly benefited from the thing that creates the damage. They are benefiting from reliance, and we think that that's why they should pay. We also think, secondly, they often take advantage of natural resources. In the context of things like pulp mills, steel mills, they often do damage to the environment, and we make them pay for that. But also, that damage and that use of natural resources is often a one-time thing. Those resources are scarce. We think it is very legitimate to make them pay for that in this particular context. Thirdly, we think that companies benefit from mono-industrial towns. Why in Detroit do they benefit from it being the car-making capital of the United States? Because you consume the workers and the infrastructure in a particular place in such a way as deters different industries from establishing. No thank you. Because when roads are built in a certain way, when supply chains are constructed in a certain way, when populations are geared, as you say, geared towards working in a particular industry from birth because that's where your dad worked, then you get a particular benefit that excludes other businesses from operating in that area. You are not likely to start a high-tech startup in an area that is filled with steel mill workers, right? Obviously you don't mill steel, I don't know why I'm saying that. Right, so the very fact that they consume this scarce resource acts as a deterrent to competition establishing, which is the very thing that creates structural unemployment, because you don't have any other skills, you don't even have any other businesses in your town that you can go to. We think that further, they benefit from what is known in town planning as the agglomeration benefit. When a number of different when a number of similar industrial corporations operate together, they get distinct benefits, right? Those benefits are that certain people tend to move to that town because they either have skills and expertise in that particular thing, or you establish research hubs which benefit multiple people, or you share supply chains and you share infrastructure. The agglomeration benefit explains why industries which should be competitive cluster together all the time near each other. We think that those are benefits they extract by making towns mono-industrial. We think those create an obligation to pay the cost of making a mono-industrial town. No thank you. The final reason they have this obligation is because it's proportionate, Mr. Speaker. All corporations make things, all corporations employ people, and all corporations pay tax. But only some corporations leave an employment vacuum that traps people and cripples whole areas. Similarly, it might be entirely economically rational for you to dump all of your mine tailings into a river that destroys and pollutes that river. It will make more money for you, make your products cheaper, might even employ more people. But why do we make corporations pay for that externality? Because it hurts everyone else, Mr. Speaker. We think similarly, when all corporations pay tax but only some cause this particular type of damage, then only some should pay for this particular type of damage. No thank you, sir. Second point that I want to look at. How will this change corporate behaviour? The key part of this is that if a corporation can avoid leaving behind a structurally unemployed populace, not some unemployed people, a structurally unemployed populace, then that corporation will not have to pay for all of those people's welfare. What incentives does that create? Number one, it creates an incentive to slow down your withdrawal, to give workers time to adapt. Not to not withdraw entirely, just to slow it down. Why? Because that is much cheaper than having to pay for the welfare of every single person in that town. We think that's still good for the corporation, because presumably they're moving to a location with a cheaper workforce, especially if they're moving to another country, right? They still get a benefit. It is just delayed, and it is amortized over some time. And it's also good for the new place they're going, because they still get the car company just 2 years later than they would. It means that they plan for this and withdraw more slowly. They give more notice to their workers when they might not otherwise do so. They give more notice to the jurisdiction when they might not otherwise do so. Because if they don't, they're more likely to leave behind a structurally unemployed populace, which will cost them more. We are creating an economic imperative for a corporation to act in mutual interest, and we think that is important. Secondly, how does this change corporate behaviour? It encourages them to provide ongoing and valuable training, education and skills to their workers in a way that is not just to perform the core functions of that corporation. Matt?
When governments can just sell out by expecting corporations to provide social security and to avoid economic sensible restructuring, a state's going to be more or less proactive to engage in that themselves.
People who are on welfare, even from a corporation, are not contributing tax dollars. Therefore, we think that governments always have an incentive to make sure that population is working efficiently and make sure that population is looked after. We do not believe that this will lead to governments shirking their responsibility, because the electoral politics of being a government means it's very hard to do so. Back to where I was, providing ongoing and valuable training, education and skills. We think that when you are able to get money from the people that you're talking to, from your employees, when you're able to redeploy them perhaps in a new jurisdiction, if it is just about moving internally in the United States, or if you're able to train them up to do other things, you will do so only if there's an economic incentive to do so. And right now, we think that car manufacturers don't have an incentive to train anyone to do anything but put seatbelts in places where seatbelts go. We think that our model creates a reason why it might be cheaper for you to amortise over the life of an employee ongoing training in something other than their core thing. That might be training in computer classes. That might be training in basic accounting. That might be training in any other basic thing that might lead them to be employed later. We think that the corporations are the best place to do this because they're the ones that are likely to know what will be valuable elsewhere in the market. They know what emerging technologies are. They know what the new thing, a new form of technology that's making workers redundant is. So they're more likely to train people to do that. But they'll only engage in that kind of training which avoids structural unemployment if there's an economic cost. Finally, how does this change town and government behaviour? Corporations will not go into some jurisdictions. I agree with the opening opposition. That is a good thing. It is a clear market signal there is something wrong with that town that means that A corporation might be evacuating down the track, or B, it is a mono-industrial, low-skilled or single-skilled town that is on the precipice of failure. We think our model would have meant that we would have had a clearer signal about Detroit's impending doom before it did, because corporations would have been more reticent about going in there. Corporations have an obligation to do this. If we give them economic incentives, they'll act in a way that's more efficient and effective for everyone, and they'll send a signal about which towns need reform. It is for that reason that we propose.